What kind of man raids Rome by pretending to be dead? He sailed farther than any Viking before him. He outwitted cities older than his own civilization. And by the time Europe realized who he was, it was already too late. This isn't a myth. This is Bjorn Ironside. Born of a name, forged in blood. I'm going to take you back to 9th century Scandinavia, a world of iron winters, longships, and bloodlines that mattered more than crowns. This is where Bjorn Ironside's story begins. We know almost nothing about Bjorn's childhood in the modern sense. No cradles, no tutors, no written memories. And in a way, that silence says everything. Boys born into Viking royalty were raised not to be remembered as children, but to be tested as men. Bjorn was born sometime in the early 9th century. His name at birth was Björn Ragnarsson, Bjorn, son of Ragnar. His father, Ragnar Lothbrok, already a rising legend. His mother, according to the sagas, was Eysteinn. From the beginning, Bjorn lived in the shadow of a name that shook Europe. And the question hanging over him was simple. Would he merely inherit it, or earn one of his own? That answer came early. According to the legendary sagas, Bjorn first stepped into history when his father Ragnar faced King Eysteinn of Sweden, a rebel ruler who dared to challenge Ragnar's authority. With both armies drawn up and ready for slaughter, Eysteinn offered Ragnar a choice: an all-out battle or a holmgang, a duel to decide the war without drowning the field in blood. Ragnar chose the duel. Eysteinn named his champion, Starkadr, a fearsome warrior of legend, fighting alongside his 7 sons, 8 men, 8 killers. Ragnar did something unexpected. Instead of choosing a single champion, he chose his sons. Ragnar, Bjorn, and Bjorn's half-brothers, Friedleif and Radbard, stepped forward together, not as princes, not as heirs, but as warriors sharing the risk and the glory. The duel was fought in full view of both armies, and when it ended, all 8 of Eystein's champions lay dead. The sagas say Bjorn fought like something unbreakable, cutting down enemy after enemy without suffering a single wound. That day, the warriors watching from both sides began to whisper a new name, Bjorn Ironside, not because armor saved him, but because nothing seemed to pierce him. With their champions fallen, Ragnar's army surged forward, seeing Starkadr and his sons dead, broke the enemy's spirit. Ragnar himself pressed the attack, and King Eysteinn was slain. What followed was total defeat. No mercy, no retreat. Victory was absolute. And in front of his warriors, Ragnar did something that changed Bjorn's life forever. He granted Bjorn lordship over Sweden, rewarding him not for his blood, but for his courage. It was a powerful message. Bjorn was no longer just Ragnar's son. He was a leader. But glory in the Viking world never comes without cost. Not long after, Bjorn was summoned again, this time to fight beside his father and brothers on foreign shores. Together, they raided the Orkney Islands and pushed into Scotland, where they faced the forces of King Muredhach. The fighting lasted 3 brutal days. In the end, the enemy king was killed, but victory was bought with blood. Bjorn's half-brothers, Friedleif and Radbard, fell in the fighting. For the first time, Bjorn learned the true price of legacy. Not songs, not land, but loss. And as the smoke cleared over the battlefield, one truth became impossible to ignore. Bjorn Ironside was no longer being shaped by his father's shadow. He was being forged by war itself. And this was only the beginning. After the war in Scotland, Bjorn Ironside returned to his own lands. For a time, the sea was calm. Then the news arrived. Bjorn received word of his father's death. Ragnar Lothbrok, captured and killed by King Ella of Northumbria. The sagas say Bjorn was playing a game of dice when the message reached him. He did not stand. He did not shout. Instead, he clenched the dice in his hand so tightly that blood ran from his fingers and stained the table. And then he spoke. "Fate is more fickle than the dice I throw." In that moment, something changed. Ragnar was no longer a living shadow over Bjorn's life. He was a debt. Bjorn did not mourn for long. He called his banners and took to the sea, joining his brothers as they sailed toward Northumbria with a fleet the world had never seen before. Hundreds of ships darkening the horizon, driven not by ambition, but by vengeance. Soon, Bjorn joined forces with his most feared brother, Ivar the Boneless. Together, their armies merged into something greater than the sum of its parts. History would remember it as the Great Heathen Army. When the brothers finally met Ella's forces, the outcome was swift and devastating. The sagas describe Bjorn and Ivar fighting with a calm, almost unnatural focus, like men already decided by fate. Ella's army was broken. His power ended. King Ella himself was captured and executed according to Viking custom. With that, the sons of Ragnar believed their father's spirit was finally at peace. The debt had been paid. He returned north to his own kingdom, leaving Ivar the Boneless behind to rule in England. Bjorn was not made to sit still. Unlike his brother, who ruled through fear and strategy, Bjorn was restless, drawn by curiosity as much as conquest. He had heard stories of lands far to the south, of cities rich beyond imagination, of seas that shimmered beneath an unrelenting sun. And so began Bjorn's most famous and most daring venture. Around 860 AD, following the path once carved by his father, Bjorn set sail again, this time alongside his brother Heathen. They raided the coasts of northern Francia, as many Vikings had done before. But instead of turning home, they sailed on, past the familiar waters, past the edges of known fear, into the Mediterranean. They struck the coasts of Iberia, sailed through the Strait of Gibraltar, and pushed eastward, raiding ports, testing empires, and proving that no sea was beyond Viking reach. Eventually, they wintered in southern Francia, far from home, farther than almost any Scandinavian warband had ever gone before. Björn Ironside was no longer just the son of Ragnar. He was becoming something else entirely. A sea king whose name would echo far beyond the north. A man chasing not revenge, but destiny. And the world had not yet seen the limits of how far he was willing to sail. Chapter 3. The Trick That Fooled an Empire. By the summer of the following year, Björn Ironside had pushed farther south than almost any Viking before him. The Mediterranean lay open before his sails, and with it, cities that had grown rich for centuries behind stone walls and ancient faith. One of the first to fall was Pisa, a prosperous port city, unprepared for warriors from the far north. The sack sent shockwaves across the region. But for Bjorn, Pisa was not the prize. It was only a signpost. There, Bjorn heard whispers of a city beyond all others, a city of unmatched wealth. The heart of Christianity itself, Rome. Bjorn knew what his father had taken from England and Francia. Gold stripped from monasteries, silver torn from altars, and if those lands had been rich, what unimaginable treasures must lie at the center of Christendom? Driven by ambition and belief in his own fate, Bjorn marched inland. But fate has a sense of irony. The city his army reached was not Rome, it was Luna. Mistaking it for the Eternal City, the Vikings laid siege. But Luna was no easy target. Its walls held firm, supplies ran low. Time, Bjorn's usual ally, began to turn against him. For the first time on this great southern expedition, brute force was not enough. So Bjorn did something that would define his legend forever. He chose deception. Bjorn ordered a rumor to be spread, carefully, deliberately, until it reached the ears of Luna's bishop. The rumor claimed that the Viking leader had fallen gravely ill, that on his deathbed Bjorn had renounced the old gods and accepted Christ. His final wish, it was said, was simple: a Christian burial in consecrated ground within the city. To deny burial to a converted soul was unthinkable. Permission was granted. Bjorn's body was carried into Luna in a coffin, escorted by a small honor guard. Clergy gathered, prayers were spoken, and then Bjorn rose. The moment shattered every assumption the city had made. Gates were opened from within. The Viking army surged inside, and Luna fell not to strength, but to mind. The raid became legendary, not for its violence, but for its brilliance. Björn Ironside was no longer just feared, he was respected. A warrior who could outthink bishops and outmaneuver cities older than his people's written history. Emboldened by success, Bjorn pushed on, raiding Sicily and even striking the coasts of North Africa. Places no Viking was ever meant to reach. For a brief moment, it seemed as though no shore was beyond his grasp, but the world was learning, and the world was preparing. On the journey home, somewhere off the Iberian coast, Bjorn's fleet was met by a powerful enemy. Southern rulers who had anticipated his return. Their ships attacked with terrifying incendiary weapons. Flames that burned even on water, turning the sea itself into a weapon. Bjorn lost many ships. Much of his treasure was gone. The sea that had carried him to glory now demanded its price. Still, he escaped, wounded, diminished, but alive, and that mattered. Because Bjorn Ironside returned north, not as a raider, but as a legend who had sailed farther than any of his kin, challenged empires, fooled cities, and survived the fire of the south. He had seen the world, and the world would never forget that the Vikings had reached its heart. Chapter 4: What Remains. After the waves on his long journey home, along the Christian coasts of Spain, he struck once more to lift the spirits of his men. And then, at last, Björn turned home. He returned to Scandinavia with enough wealth to live out the rest of his days as a rich man, but riches were never his greatest prize. When Ragnar Lothbrok was gone, the Viking world did not collapse, it divided, and Björn stood at its center. He inherited rule in Sweden, where he founded what later sources call the House of Munsö, a dynasty that ruled for generations and would, according to tradition, eventually give rise to the royal house of Denmark. Whether history or legend, one thing is clear: Björn's bloodline mattered. He became not just a raider, but a king. Björn had sons of his own, among them Rifil and Erik Björnsson, the latter remembered as a king of Sweden in his own right. Through later sagas, Björn is also linked to descendants who carried the Viking spirit even farther, men who crossed the open Atlantic and reached lands beyond Europe, including the explorers remembered in the sagas of Greenland and Vinland. If Ragnar opened the gates of legend, Björn helped carry it across oceans. The House of Munsö, known in Sweden as the Old Dynasty, took its name from the island where Björn was said to be buried, Munsö, in a great burial mound crowned by stone and runes, a resting place not just for a man, but for an age. Björn Ironside was a warrior like his father, a leader like his brothers, but he was something else too. He was a bridge between myth and history, between the frozen north and the sunlit south, between the first Viking raids and a world forever changed by them. Ragnar Lothbrok may have been the spark, but Björn Ironside was the flame that carried it across the world. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Björn lived up to the legacy of his father? Was he greater than Ragnar, more accomplished than Ivar the Boneless? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to continue this journey through history, through legends, truth, and everything in between, make sure to like, subscribe, and share, because this was not the end of the story. If you liked this video, click the next one on screen. I'm confident it's exactly what you're looking for.